Hey guys, welcome back to more Karen stories. Imagine a neighbor so delusional she parks in your driveway, leaves you notes saying that she will park wherever she wants, and then calls the cops on you when her car gets towed. But wait until you hear what she did when the police actually showed up. It will blow your mind. And the first one is titled, Neighbor Karen Surprise Attacks Police After I Towed Her Car, Gets $375,000 Bond. So a few months ago I inherited a house from my grandmother. My parents were not really in the picture and my grandparents basically raised me. My grandpa had passed away a few years prior and my grandma's physical health was steadily declining, so she decided to move into one of those assisted living facilities. The circumstances definitely sucked, but I was grateful to move into the house where I basically grew up. I was fresh out of college and even with the utilities and house maintenance, it was cheaper than rent. Anyways, I was still in the process of moving in, meeting the neighbors, figuring out where to buy the cheapest groceries, etc. Then one morning I walk outside to grab something from my car and surprise, there's a random SUV parked in my driveway. At first I thought maybe it was a visitor, delivery or whatever. Right as I get out of my car, which I had to park in front of the house versus the driveway, I see a woman I'd never met before strutting over like she owned the place. She waves at me from my driveway and then gets in the SUV and drives away. No, oops, sorry, no, is this your place? Just pure confidence. That was my first introduction to Karen. I know, I really should have said something then, but the whole interaction was so odd. She did not say anything and I didn't know what to say. Besides, maybe it was just a one-time thing. I was wrong. The next time it happened, I decided to be polite. It was only a few days after the initial incident. I'd been parking in my driveway, but one day when I was coming home from work, her car was parked there. Apparently, she was my next door neighbor. I saw her exit the house and come into her car in my driveway. I walked out and said, "Hey, just so you know, this is my driveway. Could you maybe not park here?" She looks me dead in the eye, smirks and says, "I have parking rights." Excuse me? What? Is that like squatters' rights but for asphalt? Pretty sure that's not how driveways work, Karen. But she said it so confidently that for a split second I wondered if I had missed something in the deed. Like maybe her and my grandma had some kind of agreement. Spoiler, I hadn't. Or rather, they hadn't. I explained as nicely as possible that no, there are no parking rights. This was my private property and I'd appreciate it if she didn't use it. She rolled her eyes and muttered something about me being selfish, then she walked off like I was the one inconveniencing her. Fast forward a couple of weeks, Karen keeps parking there, sometimes blocking me in, sometimes leaving trash in my yard when she hops out. Annoying, but manageable. I wish I had been more direct when confronting her, but this was a first for me. It was also my first time owning a house and well, I just didn't really know what to do. Then came the big day of my big job interview. I had my suit ready, notes reviewed, all that nervous prep energy. I walk outside with 45 minutes to spare and of course her SUV is in my driveway. But this time my car was parked in front of my driveway, so she was basically blocking me in my own driveway. She was not even home. Her car was just sitting there like a big shiny middle finger to my employment hopes. I had no choice but to wait for an Uber, which made me late to my job interview. I was so frustrated because I was really excited about this opportunity and it was basically ruined because of my neighbor. I mean, how I was supposed to explain that I was late because my neighbor parked in my driveway? It just sounds silly. That was the exact moment I stopped being nice neighbor and started being petty legal property owner. The next day, I purchased a big clear sign. It said, "Private driveway, no parking, violators will be towed." I bolted it right onto the fence next to the driveway, so there was no way to miss it. I also left her a note on her windshield the next time she parked there, spelling it out, "This is private property. If you park here again, I will have your car towed. You have 48 hours notice. This is your warning." She crumpled it up and tossed it in my yard. Charming. So of course the very next day she parks in my driveway again, but this time she left her own note on the dashboard in Sharpie on a piece of cardboard. It said, "You don't own the street. I will park wherever I want." I wish I was making that up. She even signed it like she was leaving an autograph. Who does that? So I called a tow company, true to my word. They came, hitched up her car, and in less than 10 minutes, Karen's SUV was gone. My driveway was blessedly empty. I felt like Simba on Pride Rock reclaiming the kingdom, but peace never lasts long when you live next to a Karen. Not an hour later, she comes storming over, red-faced and shrieking like I just kidnapped her firstborn. She demands that I pay the towing fees because I had no right to steal her car. I calmly pointed at the giant "no parking" sign and how I didn't steal her car. I had it towed. She screeches louder, saying that she will ruin me. At this point, I'm just standing there sipping my coffee like, "Ma'am, I don't think you understand how any of this works." Then she whips out her phone, dials 911, and tells the dispatcher that I stole her car. Not that it got towed, nope, straight up Grand Theft Auto. She even demanded they send officers to arrest me on the spot. Obviously that's not how it works. At this point I was beginning to find the whole thing entertaining. Shortly after, a couple of officers roll up and Karen launches into her Oscar-worthy performance. According to her, I dragged her out of her SUV, hotwired it and drove into the sunset. Meanwhile, I'm standing there with my driveway as empty as her brain cells. If I drove her car off, how did I get back to my house without it? Come on, Karen, if you're gonna lie, at least make it believable. The officers let her rant for a good 5 minutes before then turning to me. I explained the whole situation, showed them the posted signs and even pulled out my copy of the tow slip from the company. They nodded, thanked me for being prepared and turned back to Karen. They tell her, very patiently, that this is private property, that towing was completely legal, and that if she wanted her car back, she needed to contact the impound lot. She did not take that well though. I think she really thought that they would get her car back for her. Karen's face turned a shade of red I've only ever seen in cartoons. She started screaming about corruption, illegal laws, and how she will have all of us arrested. The officers tried to de-escalate, but she just got louder and more aggressive, and then she really messed up. She shoved one of the cops, and when they tried to calm her down, she swung at them. Not just one, but two of the officers. She was flailing like an angry toddler who skipped nap time, except, she was assaulting actual cops. That was it. They tackled her, cuffed her, and hauled her off screaming about her rights. It turns out assaulting police officers is not something the legal system finds particularly cute. She was hit with multiple felony charges, including assault on law enforcement, and since she went after more than one officer, that is potentially 2 to 10 years per charge. When she went before the judge, they took one look at the stack of charges and set her bond at $375,000. Because apparently this was not her first run-in with the law, the judge mentioned that she had a prior misdemeanor for disorderly conduct and other stuff last year, which probably didn't help. From what I've heard through other neighbors, her family is scrambling to come up with the money, possibly putting their house on the line. Meanwhile, her car is still sitting in the tow yard, racking up daily storage fees, and yeah, I don't think she's getting out anytime soon, nor do I think she will get her car back, and her reputation? Absolutely nuked. The neighbor across the street had mentioned to me she always knew that she was a Karen, but didn't know that she would take something that far. To be fair, I don't think anyone could have guessed she would attack a police officer over someone else's driveway, not exactly normal behavior. As for me, I've got my driveway back, my peace restored, and the most entertaining front row seat to a self-inflicted disaster I could ever ask for. As for Karen, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. And yeah guys, that Karen definitely got what she deserved. I hope she will never park in another driveway again that doesn't belong to her. But then again, these people usually never learn their lessons. If you enjoyed the story so far, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. The next one is another fantastic petty revenge story and is titled "Don't Be a Rude eBay Seller." So I sell on eBay and sometimes buy in bulk to flip. Recently, I spotted a listing for a bunch of TI Inspire calculators marked as school property. They were listed for parts only with the condition "turns on but needs additional equipment." I've sold a lot of calculators and usually if they turn on, they are fine, so I sent the seller a polite message asking why extra equipment was needed. His response? "Just for you to ask shows your intelligence. Ha, bored?" Completely unprovoked. I told him I was not being rude, just curious, and he doubled down. "If you were smart enough to read the description, you would not ask anything. I'm not entitled to..." Educate you. Then he said he's just gonna block me so he doesn't waste his time. Normally, I would roll my eyes and move on, but I didn't for this seller. I looked at his negative reviews and apparently he does this to everyone and is very racist about it. There's even some negative feedback complaining he cancelled an order before shipping, and he replied it was because a Honduras scammer or something like that, and makes fun of people who speak Spanglish. So I dig. And I find that his listing descriptions has his phone number. I googled that phone number and find that he runs another eBay store under a company name that claims to do electronics recycling and refurbishing. Selling different inventory of high-ticket medical devices like electrotherapy units, ultrasound heats, laser therapy applicators, the kind that requires FDA 510K clearance and cannot be legally sold to the general public without proper authorization. eBay has an entire policy banning these unless you're an approved medical seller, so I spent some time compiling a list of his priciest, clearest violations. I cross-checked them with FDA's device classification database and matched them to eBay's medical devices and accessories restricted list. Then I reported them all through eBay's item not allowed category, attaching the exact model names and classification codes. Fast forward to this morning, eBay emails me to say 6 of his most expensive listings are gone, including multiple $2,000 plus medical therapy devices, electrotherapy systems, and vital accessory packs. They even removed some for parts-only listings, which eBay still bans if they are restricted devices. In fact, the total amount for the listings removed came out to be $13,590. I'm not saying I sank his store, but I probably ruined his week. Moral of the story, if you're gonna be smug and block people for asking questions, make sure your business model can survive someone actually reading the rules. And the next one is another super satisfying revenge story, and it is titled Power Tripping Receptionist Gets No Candy. Also, let me know in the comments where you are watching from today, and let me know whether you enjoy petty revenge or in general revenge stories or malicious compliance more. I'm very curious. So years ago I was hired by a small business to handle all the accounting and payroll. We had about 10 of us in the office, 4 more in the shop out back, and about 50 workers in the field on various jobs. I had 2 people that I supervised and I reported directly to the owner. The receptionist, let's call her Karen, had basic receptionist duties and she occasionally ran some errands for the owner and his wife, picking up their dog from the groomer type of things. Karen had this queen bee thing going on because she had worked with the owner since the beginning. She would sneer at employees like, 2 minutes late in the morning. You would get a raised eyebrow and a dramatic lifting of the arm and tapping her watch. Attempt to bully them. Owner would tell her to ask me to do something and she would come into my office with a smirk and act like she was laying down the law. And if you were not in Karen's good graces, things you needed done like packages sent out, appointments made, office supplies ordered, stuff a receptionist does, somehow took way longer than they should. It got to the point where instead of dealing with her personally, we would just do her tasks ourselves just to avoid friction. One thing the owner liked to do when he was at Costco was get a box of granola bars, candy bars or other snacks, put it in the kitchen area for everyone to grab one for a treat, and one day the owner brought a box of Snickers in, and Karen bounded with glee to the kitchen. As she walked by my office, I noticed she had grabbed a bunch of them and was trying to quickly get back to her desk. Later that day, one of the shop guys, Kevin, came in and I told him to grab a Snickers bar from the kitchen on his way out. Kevin chuckled and said, "Does Karen know about them? If she does, there won't be any left." He mentioned that every time the boss brings some snacks in, she grabs a bunch and hoards them in her desk. Well, sure enough, in the kitchen there was only one candy bar left out of the whole box. Now, this is the kind of thing I usually just roll my eyes at and go on living my life. And I did. New box of treats? There she goes to the kitchen. Honestly, who really cares, right? Well, until a couple months later, the owner called me into his office and wanted to talk about this huge tax penalty notice we had received in the mail. It turns out that Karen had gone through and opened the mail on my desk, a big no-no, saw this juicy problem, and instead of putting it back on my desk as she should have, ran it to the owner to try and throw me under the bus somehow. So what had happened was, the state had implemented a new system and it spat out these tax penalty letters to every business in the county. It was a mistake. We had filed and paid everything on time. But I had about 15 minutes of panic while I dug the file out, and we called the assessor's office to straighten everything out. Oh, now it is on. Sometime later, Karen was out running some errands for the owner, and I saw him at her desk looking for paper clips. I saw an opportunity. I helpfully looked with him until we came to a drawer with her candy stash. Friends, it was like opening a treasure chest. There were about 35 to 40 candy bars that Karen had squirreled into there from various boxes the owner had brought in over the last couple months. The owner got real quiet and then grabbed all the candy bars and laid them out on his desk in his office. He'd immediately figured out how, when he buys a box of 30 or so candy bars for 10 people in the office, it is emptied quickly. Later, Karen came back to the office. She put all her stuff down, opened her drawer to get herself a treat. Her face went from confusion to shock when she saw the drawer was empty, to white as a sheet when the owner came out and said, "Karen, can you come to my office for a minute?" According to the owner, she had reasoned that she was owed a fair share of the candy because she claimed that she worked harder than anyone else around the office. So whenever a new box was opened, she would just take her share and put them in her drawer. Over time, her share had grown to as many as she could carry back to her desk without looking silly. Karen was given a formal reprimand and was told that if he brought any candy in, she had to wait a day for everyone else to get one before she could take one. She was very quiet and fairly decent from then on out. She mostly behaved for the next couple of years until I moved on to another job. It was particularly funny to watch her facial expression when the owner brought in a new box of candy, like a scolded puppy. But the best part, the owner went out to the shop with the candy bar cash and gave them all to the guys out there. Kevin came in the next day with a big grin and told me that Snickers was the sweetest candy bar he'd ever eaten. Anyway, the next one will be stories from Ask Reddit. The thread was titled, "Police Officers of Reddit, what is your best, I think we have the wrong person, story?" Story 1. I've got two from 25 years ago when I was a cop, on one side of the badge and one from the other. So the first, I got assigned a warrant service to pick up a wanted felon. Mr. Robertson was 6 foot tall, 250 pounds, long red hair, bushy red beard, and lived at, let's say, 123 Elm Street. Pretty distinctive dude. So I roll up to 123 Elm Street, and sure enough, there mowing his lawn in the front yard is the man himself. 6 foot, 250 pounds, red hair, red beard. I make contact with him and say, "Hey, Mr. Robertson, you got warrants and it's time to go to jail." Hook him up, take him to jail, and in central booking, I get his property off him, and while filling out the inventory, happen to notice that this guy is Mr. Robinson, not Robertson. Sure enough, the wanted guy was my guy's landlord and his twin brother from another mother doppelganger. When I'd said Robertson, Robinson didn't even twig to the fact that I hadn't said his name, he just heard the similar sounding name as his own. We had to walk the whole thing back and reactivate the warrant, and then kicked him loose with a handshake and an apology. The one from the other side, I'd just gotten off duty at 2 AM and was driving home still in uniform. There wasn't any other traffic on the road, so I was not really surprised when a police car turned in behind me and started following me. I figured he was trolling for drunks and I was the only thing moving on the road, so he was just gonna follow me a little to observe my driving, and he would realize pretty quick that I was sober and peel off. Well, instead another patrol car joined him, and another, then all four lit me up and spread out behind me, blocking the road in a full felony stop. Well, this just got interesting. They went through the whole procedure and I carefully followed their instructions. When they finally got me out and saw my uniform, they just stopped for a few seconds while I was trying to figure out just what the hell was going on. Then 3 of the officers got in their cars, turned off their lights and took off, while the original officer told me I could put my hands down and explain what was going on. My car was a spot-on match for the suspect vehicle in an armed robbery and shooting that had just occurred right up the road. I would have driven right by the scene before the cops even got there a few minutes before the officer in the next district spotted me and thought I was the subject. It was an interesting night. And the next one is another story from Ask Reddit. I'm not a cop, but the wrong person in question. There's another man 2 years younger than me who shares my first and last name, exact same spelling. The only difference is the middle name. Police were investigating a county trustee who was giving people housing assistance checks they didn't qualify for. They would cash the assistance and give the trustee a percentage back. One of the civilians being investigated was the other guy. A plainclothes cop in an unmarked car shows up with a female holding a clipboard, identifies himself as a state trooper, and within 5 minutes is asking me for copies of my bank records. He is threatening to subpoena if I don't comply. This is not the first time I've been mistaken for him. I used to get his mail all the time, and I even asked if they were looking for me or the other guy, pointing out our different middle names. I got really suspicious really fast. A high-pressure situation demanding access to my financial records, threats of subpoenas and further legal action, so I started to doubt this was an actual police officer and was in fact just a scammer. The badge he showed me was just a plastic square like my driver's license, further muddying the issue. I told him I wanted to speak with the police and called dispatch. 2 uniformed officers showed up 50 minutes later and confirmed the guy was an officer. The woman with him was some kind of auditor and records keeper. After a further 15 minutes of questions, the woman pulled the guy away and pointed out something on her phone. And yep, they wanted the other guy. And the next one is also from Ask Reddit. So I live in a small town in rural England, and we used to get some trainees/new police officers from the Met there for their training. Me and some of my friends were teenagers and we were walking to the supermarket because what else is there to do in a small town pre-internet? Suddenly, from out of nowhere, this police car comes screaming out of nowhere, sirens going, and screeches to a halt in front of us. A young guy, must have only been about 5 years or so older than us, jumps out and starts giving us the whole hairdryer treatment. He lines us up and starts taking our statements of what we had been up to in the last hour, gloating at us and saying, "You lads are in trouble now, criminal damage, trespass and theft, you have really screwed up." With him was the local Bobby, and he came up to each of us in turn after the younger guy had grilled us and said very jovially, "No, don't worry lads, I'm sure it's a misunderstanding, we've had some reports of a break-in. And well, you don't match the preliminary description and I'm sure we will get this cleared up when we get the more detailed description come through." And by the way, what is a local Bobby? Maybe our lovely British friends in the comments can explain. Anyway, so the more detailed description comes through the radio and the young guy is wearing the biggest crap-eating grin you had ever seen. The description did not even remotely match, and honestly, the young guy looked so disappointed, we all ended up feeling sorry for him. So yeah, that was probably quite embarrassing for him. And the next one is another story from r/Ask Reddit. I am not a cop, but my mom had a story for this happen to her. Basically, it revolves around the show America's Most Wanted. A woman who looked almost exactly like my mom was featured on the show. She had the same hair, same face at the kicker, same name. They even showed my mom's actual information, which I won't list here, as being the criminals. The story ended like every story on that show does. If you have any information regarding the whereabouts of this dangerous criminal, please call this number. Now onto my mom's perspective. She was just sitting at home on a Saturday night alone. As she lived alone, she was reading a Stephen King book when she hears some commotion coming from the hallway. She ignores it, lots of yelling, she had not seen the show which painted her as a criminal, and then suddenly, bam, her door is knocked down in an instant. About 10 cops flood into her one-bedroom apartment and she is arrested. She explained that they had the wrong person, they claimed everything matched, social security matched, DNA also matched, name matched, photo resemblance matched. It turns out the woman was basically stealing my mom's identity and intentionally making herself look like my mom. The end result is, when they created a profile for the criminal, they used my mom's information to start with. So, when they arrested my mom, of course the information matched, it was her information originally. They kept her in jail for 2 weeks. It was not until they took fingerprints from the scene of a crime they said she committed and the prints did not match. Then they realized that she was not the criminal. It's scary to think if they had used her profile prints rather than crime scene prints as the set to compare to, that she would have been still in jail today. It was basically a life sentence. And yeah, ripe stars, I gotta say, these cops sound highly incompetent. That is absolutely terrifying. Either way, the next one is another Ask Reddit story. Obligatory, not a cop. A few years ago, my husband and I were having a lazy Sunday morning, making pancakes, blasting music, having a good time. And then there's a really loud banging on the door and I rush over to answer it, thinking someone must have knocked a couple times before we heard it, and open it up to 4 police officers who push into our kitchen. 2 of them grab my husband and start telling him that he is being placed under arrest for a hit-and-run accident that took place in a city almost 2 hours away. Freaking out, my husband explains to the police that he was at work all night and just got home about an hour before that. He must have been really convincing because 2 officers sat at our kitchen table with us while the other 2 went outside to call my husband's workplace to confirm his story. Turns out, a car that we had sold about a year before that was involved in an accident that hit 3 parked cars. And a woman the night prior. Woman had minor injuries thankfully, but the driver was nowhere to be found. There was a clear video of our old car smashing into parked cars, hitting pedestrians, and a man jumping out of it shortly afterwards. When the police found the abandoned car and ran the VIN, it led them to our house. In Ontario, when you sell a vehicle, you're supposed to bring a slip into the Service Ontario Centre to prove that the ownership has transferred, but it's not really enforced. And there's no penalties for not doing it, because the person purchasing the vehicle needs to do the same to get plates, stickers, insurance, etc. Obviously and stupidly, we did not do this. The cops came back in, apologized for the mistake, gave us a half-hearted lecture about properly switching ownerships, and then left. The dick that was actually driving the car was caught the next day. An officer called my husband to tell him and made a joke about us having to pay any impound fees. And the next one is another malicious compliance story, and it's titled "Don't Speak to the Regional Manager." So many moons ago, I was the lowest guy at a renter center. The regional manager, Greg, was visiting, and my manager, wanting all the attention, told me not to speak to Greg for any reason. When Greg arrived, he introduced himself and shook my hand, but I stayed silent. My manager gave a nervous smile and told him my name. Later, the phone rang for Greg. I yelled for my manager across the store that the phone was for Greg, even though Greg was standing right next to me. Greg asked why I didn't just tell him directly. I silently looked at my manager, who awkwardly admitted he had told me not to talk to him. Greg found it ridiculous and my manager looked like a fool. And yeah guys, thank you for watching. Please check out my playlist on the left if you cannot get enough of my content, and I will see you again tomorrow.